tired, you're poor, you're huddled masses yearning to breathe free.
On January 21st, barely 24 hours after Donald Trump took the oath of office, huge crowds took to the streets to protest his presidency and support women's rights and human rights. The protests were massive, and they took place not just across the United States, but in more than 600 locations all over the world. In Australia, in Georgia, in Vancouver, Canada, in the Czech Republic, in Germany, and in London, England. Washington, D.C. was the site of the original protest, and while at 500,000 or more, the crowd may have eclipsed that of the Trump inauguration, there were no arrests.
An emboldened Congress continues to threaten the rights of women, and now they want to make it permanent.
There were other marches. In New York City, officials estimated more than 400,000 people converged on Midtown Manhattan and made their way up Fifth Avenue towards Trump Tower. The Chicago police estimated that 250,000 or more took to the streets. In Boston, nearly 175,000 people attended, according to a spokesperson for the mayor's office. And while there was no official estimate for the crowd in Los Angeles, Police Captain Andrew Nyman said that the crowd was among the largest he had seen in 30 years in the force.
Democracy is about lots of voices, not just the loudest voice.
My topic is the financial crisis and the death of macroeconomics. The topic reminds me of an old joke. A Western observer is at a Soviet May Day parade back in the 1980s. And the spectacle is overwhelming. The parade begins with crack divisions of Red Army troops, followed by battalions of these very mighty tanks, after which come huge long-range field artillery, rows and rows, followed by the nuclear missiles, okay, that are gleaming in the sun. After that, there's a small group of men, not in step at all, sort of puny, undistinguished looking, in ill-fitting suits. And the Western observer is puzzled, and he turns to his Soviet hosts and he says, "Who or what is that?" And they respond, "Well, that's our most terrible and destructive weapon. Those are economists." Well, those are our macroeconomists in the United States. Okay. All right, so I'm here to support Gary North, what he said yesterday, in trumpeting the silver lining amid the gloom and doom about the financial crisis. After a long and disreputable history of about 300 years, in my 4 words, macroeconomics is finally dead. As Gary pointed out yesterday, its leading proponents simply do not know what to do anymore. And they've said this in so many words. In fact, as Murray Rothbard, Murray was always very insightful. And back in the 1980s, after the short-lived sort of attraction to monetarism died out because they had misforecast a recession that never occurred in 1984, 85. Macroeconomics was really dead from the neck up. That was Murray's term. Okay, so it's really, since the 1980s, macroeconomics has been a zombie discipline. And I'm hoping that this crisis will finally put the zombie in its grave. So let me just give you a very short paragraph on where macroeconomics came from. Where did it come from? Okay, most people think it started with John Maynard Keynes. People that are a little bit better informed talk about Irving Fisher as the true father of macroeconomics. He first came up with the quantity theory formulated in an equation. But really, macroeconomics is a crackpot doctrine that came to life in 1705 in a very slim book entitled Money and Trade Considered, with a proposal for supplying the nation with money. The author of the book was a Scotsman. His name was John Law. He was a notorious character who was known throughout Europe as a gambler, philanderer, schemer, and escaped convict who had killed a man in a duel in London. He was also the first central banker. True. In 1716, Law became the director of the Royal Bank of France and immediately enacted the principles set out in his book. In 4 short years, he created a massive inflationary bubble that left the French monetary system in ruins when it finally burst. That was the first macroeconomic crisis. There were many more to come. I'm hoping that this one, the current one, will be our last.
We've observed in the past that there has been some type of relationship in previous years between inflation rates and unemployment rates. As unemployment goes way down, more jobs, there's pressure on wages and salaries and so forth. Is there a new paradigm out there as far as evaluating this today, and is it because of the global economy, or what is it? Because we have low unemployment, but we have, at the moment, not a lot of pressure from your testimony and what we observe on inflation.
So the relationship between slack in the economy, or unemployment, and inflation was a strong one 50 years ago. If you remember that in the 60s, there was a close correlation there, and that has gone away, and it's really been.
But we had a different economy then, did we not?
Very different economy in so many ways, and in this way, that really, I would say that period, at least 20 years ago, that period was over, and the relationship between unemployment and inflation became weak. It's become weaker and weaker and weaker. In addition to that, I think we're learning that interest rates, that the neutral interest rate is lower than we had thought. And I think we're learning that the natural rate of unemployment is lower than we thought. So monetary policy hasn't been as accommodative as we had thought. So I think we're learning all of those things. At the end of the day, there has to be a connection, because low unemployment will drive wages up, and ultimately higher wages will drive inflation, but we haven't reached that point. And in any case, that connection between the two is quite small these days.
But let's move to monetary policy. I mean, in many ways, you had a playbook for how to deal with the financial crisis. The monetary policy post the financial crisis and reviving the economy. I mean, we heard from John Williams this morning that, essentially this was, there was very little, there was a little bit of theory, some of which you had helped develop, but we were really operating blind. So in devising QE and all these other unconventional monetary policies, were you pretty confident that the theory would work, or that going into it?
Well, the problem with QE is it works in practice, but it doesn't work in theory. That's
Right.
The court repealed a 1990 ruling of its own that had banned corporations from using their money, corporations and unions from using their money to expressly call for the defeat or election of a candidate. Now, what this means is that suddenly we have the ability of corporations and unions to go run advertising on television right up to the day of an election, calling for candidates to either be, for voters to vote against or vote for candidates. What's important too is that this 1990 opinion that they overruled was based on a 1947 law. So essentially we have half a century of campaign finance activity that this court reversed.
The average American family would have to work more than 14,000 years. The highest paid guy in the NBA, Kobe Bryant, would have to play for 29 years to make as much money as Barack Obama spent to become president in 2008.
Yes, we can.
$730 million. This year, the winner, whether it is him again or someone else, is widely expected to spend as much or maybe more for the privilege of getting that ultimate corner office, the one with no corners. So where does all that money go? For Mr. Obama, 56% of it went to media, according to an analysis by the Center for Responsive Politics. Television, radio, and internet ads. $427 million worth. That means even at $3 million for 30 seconds, he could have bought every commercial in the last Super Bowl and half of this year's game too. Sport. It's not all advertising, of course. Presidential campaigns are like rapidly growing startup businesses, and that accounts for the second most expensive item on the president's tab last time, administration. About $175 million went for travel, staff salaries, shipping, rent, food, and supplies like staplers, liquid paper, and umbrellas. On the Republican side, various candidates have reported spending $32,000 on cell phones, $2,000 on floral service, and in one case, $200 on an interpreter, among other things. The next biggest item, campaign expenses. Consultants, polling units, posters, flyers, websites, and all those rallies. Bunting and balloons may be hung on trees, but they don't grow there. And on it goes. Money for fundraising events, money for unexpected expenses. Mind you, the candidates are not the only ones spending this way. This year in particular, super PACs could greatly outspend the campaigns, especially in terms of media. Unlike the candidates, these groups are not limited in how much money they can accept from businesses, labor unions, and individuals. And they're already throwing money around like there is no tomorrow. Although legally they cannot coordinate their actions with campaigns, they certainly line up behind their chosen contenders. So, how much difference does all this money make? While there are exceptions, as a rule, the candidate who spends the most or has the most spent for him wins. It's just that simple.
Daily News has a good article. It's about maplight.org, research into how much winning a Senate seat and a congressional seat cost in 2012. Wait till you get a load of these numbers. The U.S. Senate average winning race cost $10,476,451. So you got $10.5 million, well, you can win a Senate race. If you don't have $10.5 million, good luck to you, buddy. Now, do we really have a democracy? Can a farmer, God made a farmer. Could he then become a senator? Of course not if he's a local farmer. Can a local plumber do it? Can even a dentist do it? No, the only way you can do it is either you're incredibly rich or you're willing to suck up to people or corporations who are incredibly rich. Of course. Well, how about the House? I mean, that's probably affordable, right? Winning race, $1,689,580. Those are, on average, the candidates who won raised that much money. Now, where are they going to get that money? Of course, they're going to get it from a multinational corporation.
Most mornings, Latasha Goodwin feeds her 3-year-old daughter Sequoia cereal and milk.
It's good? Yes?
She buys the food with monthly vouchers worth about $60 from the Women, Infants, and Children Nutrition Program. It serves 9 million single mothers near the poverty line. Goodwin is a single mom with 5 children. She earns $30,000 per year from part-time jobs.
It's kind of hard for me to have a 9-to-5 and be a mother of 5.
What do you use the vouchers for?
For the milk, the eggs, which is a 2% milk, the eggs, the cheese, the bread. You can actually buy the apples, the oranges, the grapes, and things that would normally be out of reach.
Is this program allowing your family to eat more healthy than they would without it?
Yes. Yes, indeed.
Automatic budget cuts could force up to 775,000 mothers and children to lose not only their food vouchers, but also access to nutrition and breastfeeding classes and breast pumps. Do you think we're at a point where we need to prioritize how much of a safety net we can offer people?
The children are our future. And if you're not looking out for what's to come, then everything's going to fall apart anyway.
If you did get a 9-to-5 job, you would probably need these programs less.
Yes.
Is that something you've thought about?
That's my goal. Within the next, I'll say 6 months.
So your hope is to soon not need this program or not need it so much?
Not for me, but to make sure that it's still there for others, because it was a big help to me.
The end may come sooner than she planned.
For more than 150 years, City College of New York has prided itself on putting higher education within reach for students who can't afford a private university. But many fear that's about to change. Tuition and fee increases are expected, as well as reductions in staff and classes, to make up for proposed budget cuts from the state brought on by the recession.
The people who come from the lower levels of society, they're being priced out of the public universities. So we say that everyone should have a right to go to higher education. Everyone should have a right to better themselves, to get a better job.
Paying for college has been a struggle for Larry Hale, who's been working towards a teaching degree for more than 7 years and is tens of thousands of dollars in debt.
Defend affordable quality education and health care.
It's a common concern among students here and at public institutions across the country. Overall, spending on state-funded colleges will be down about $1 billion in 2010, from $80 billion to $79 billion per year. California will see a drop of $800 million, with some universities increasing fees by 1/3 to $10,000 per year. The budget for California high schools and elementary schools isn't much better. In the last year, spending dropped $7 billion. And the governor of New York has recently proposed cuts of $1 billion for schools at all levels.
In more than 30 states across the country, demonstrations like this one are taking place to protest state budget cuts, which critics say will devastate public education and increase the divide between rich and poor.
California has already seen a 32% increase in college tuitions. The protest movement started there and is growing, along with concern for future generations.
We are moving back towards a highly segregated school system, but then also by income level, you see that just our school system is based on property taxes. So wealthy neighborhoods have wealthy schools and poor neighborhoods have poor schools.
President Obama said many times that education is the civil rights issue of our time. But the people protesting here feel that the administration is going in the wrong direction.
We say the money is there. It's being used to wage war and been used to bail out banks.
A plan many feel is putting the youth of America at risk.
Amazon is a huge company, but do you know just how huge it really is?
We start with amazing Amazon. Somewhere CEO Jeff Bezos is smiling.
It's one of only 2 U.S. companies to ever reach $1 trillion valuation.
No one in history has become as rich as quickly.
It's made Jeff Bezos the richest man in the world.
That is 100 million Prime subscribers globally.
And if you put those Prime subscribers in one country, it would be the 14th largest on the planet. The planet. But that massive company paid no federal income tax on more than $11 billion in profits in 2018. And somehow, they actually got a $129 million tax rebate.
Cities all over America are competing to host a new Amazon headquarters and the jobs that go with it. Today, Amazon whittled down the choices from 238 to 20. Mark Strassman is in Atlanta, one of the finalists.
There's never, ever been a more exciting time in Philadelphia than right now.
Finding a home for Amazon's second headquarters, the company calls it HQ2, became corporate catnip to a frenzy of suitors coast to coast.
Of Amazon's second headquarters is obviously D.C.
American communities courted with gifts of land and tax incentives worth billions. Stonecrest, Georgia proposed 345 free acres and even changing its name.
Welcome to Amazon, Georgia.
Deliberations were secret, but Amazon had a type in mind. A metropolitan area of more than 1 million people that's a hub for top tech talent. Atlanta touted its airport, highways, and business climate. The city made Amazon's final cut a birthday present for new mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms.
When you put in years at that facility, and then all of a sudden you're being told that you're no longer going to have a job, you got a family to provide for, you got kids in college, people became worried about their future.
United Technologies and Carrier stepped it up, and now they're keeping over 1,100 people, which is so great.
I went to Carrier in June of 1998, and I've been employed there since then. On July 20th, Carrier released over 300 employees, and so in December, Carrier will release 238 employees 3 days before Christmas.
We're here today in Indiana to announce our framework to deliver historic tax relief to the American people.
You have Mr. Trump right now talking about his tax cuts. His tax cuts that I feel are not going to do anything for the American worker or to do anything about bringing jobs back. Corporate greed is ugly. The taxpayers have given them all these breaks and different things of this nature in order to be able to maintain these jobs in the United States. And so what do? They move the jobs overseas. And what they fail to understand is when you shut down jobs like the Carrier job, those jobs eventually will take toll in the community. You know, the schools stop getting money. Property taxes start to grow up, because the money's got to come from somewhere to replace that money that they gave to the top. And so eventually what you start seeing is that you start seeing the foreclosures on homes, businesses closing because they can't afford to remain open. Corporate tax cuts or any tax cuts that include the rich have never did anything to help working class people. You know, for a long time we heard about the middle class. There's no such thing.
We are witnessing a total political system failure in America. If you're anything like me, you may find yourself constantly overwhelmed by everything that's wrong with politics. And when I say politics, I'm not talking about Democrats or Republicans. I'm talking about the flaws that exist in our political system, regardless of which party is in power. And I know it's hard to talk about politics these days, but look, the government is ours. We pay for it, so it needs to work for us. And right now it doesn't, and I mean it really doesn't. So what's going on here? Is it Russian meddling in social media? Is it him? Is it her? No. Those two were the least popular presidential candidates since they began keeping track of such things. Only 4% of Americans have a great deal of confidence in Congress now. Just 4%. America is no longer even considered a full democracy. We are witnessing a total political system failure in America, which is the complete opposite of what our nation's founders had in mind. So I'm going to show you 3 lines that show what's causing this failure, how we can fix it, and what you can do about it. So here's your first line. What I want you to do is take any issue you really care about and picture it on this line. This line comes from a Princeton University study that shows how public opinion influences the laws that Congress does or doesn't pass. They looked at 1,800 public opinion polls over a 20-year period, and we took their data and plotted it in this chart. See this horizontal line? That shows public support for a law amongst average Americans. This vertical line? That shows the likelihood of the public support leading to the passage of a law. When you plot it for the average American, you get a line that looks like this. There's your issue sitting on that line. If there is 0 support for a law, there's about a 30% chance that Congress is going to pass it. And if there is 100% support for something, the most popular thing ever, there's still a 30% chance that Congress is going to pass it. So the line is horizontal because no matter how much support there is among average Americans, there's still a 30% chance that Congress is going to pass that law. Princeton determined that the preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact on public policy. How in the hell does that happen? Consider this. Politicians are spending up to 70% of their time raising funds for re-election after they get into office. Why? Because in order to win a seat in the Senate in some races, you would have to raise $45,000 every single day, 365 days a year for 6 years to raise enough money to win. Now consider that only 0.05% of Americans give more than $10,000 to politics. And then you see why politicians have become completely dependent on the 0.05% of Americans, billionaires and special interest groups, who fund their campaigns. Meanwhile, you've got lobbyists writing our laws and donating to the politicians who pass them. We have a 2-party duopoly of Democrats and Republicans that makes it so that independents can't win, while the American people are leaving the major parties in droves. As you can see here, nearly half of American voters are now registered independent. And then there's gerrymandering, with politicians drawing the boundaries of their own voting districts into crazy shapes designed to prevent competition. Today, only 14% of House campaigns are actually competitive. 86% of them are not. And we wonder why young people feel that their vote doesn't matter. I've covered a lot here, but it all adds up to this vast ring of influence over our elected leaders. It's a corrupt system in which we, the people, have near zero influence over our own government. And that is sad. That is not the country I feel like I grew up in. But what's worse is that by allowing this to happen, we are causing the failure of the most important issues facing our nation. We're wasting trillions of dollars a year on fraud and abuse in our own government. 1 in 5 American children live in poverty. Our health care is the most expensive in the world. We have more people in prison per capita than Russia and China. We're losing jobs to the rest of the world, and we're not even doing enough to keep our air and our water clean for our children. America was founded on the promise of self-governance, but instead we have statistically non-significant impact on public policy.